three MCs that are going to be MCing today for our Occupy Sydney rally, and this is a great opportunity to get some more support from the community. People who've just come down to visit today, we want to really welcome you to the Occupy site from all of us who've been here throughout the week, because we've now arrived at day number 8. Now, before we start our rally today, I'd like to welcome up to the stage Graham Merritt. Graham is going to do an acknowledgement of country. Graham Merritt is a Noongar man, a Noongar Namadji man from Western Australia. He's involved in the Stop the Intervention Coalition and has been an activist in Indigenous rights movement. So please, Graham, if you're here, please come up to the front, and everyone please make Graham very welcome. Here he comes. All right, let's give it up for Graham. Woo. Aboriginal land. Always was, always will be. Aboriginal land. Always was, always will be. Aboriginal land.
Always will be Aboriginal land. Thank you. First of all, I would like to say and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we stand on today, right, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Yeah, thank you. And the other thing I'm going to say, which may sound out of line, but this land was taken over by greed. And then later on, fraud. So I know what yous are going through at the moment, and I'm proud to be here today on behalf of Sticks, and also what's happening up in the Northern Territory. It's greed, 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 and they still want to take it. They want to take it for themselves. And I'm here to say, and support yous in the right way here, for saying they are not going to take our land back. It belongs to us. It belongs to the people throughout Australia. Everywhere in Australia, this is our land, and let's negotiate and let's talk properly if we're going to get anywhere. Because the way our sister girl Jenny Macklin's going, she's not going to get anywhere. So on that note, I'd like to say thank you for being here today, and keep the good fight up. Now I know what about greed and about fraud. You've opened it up, and let's keep opening it up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Graham, for that moving speech. It's awesome. Thank you so much. It's awesome to see so many people here today. I only get out of bed before midday on a Saturday. That's awesome. I'm actually originally from Melbourne, and yesterday I had some very distressing news about Melbourne. From Occupy Melbourne, I came in at about 7 a.m. yesterday. I'll just read this little report here. There was an attack on Melbourne yesterday after an eviction notice was served at 7 a.m. by the Melbourne City Council. Footage was shown across the world of police violently breaking up the occupation in City Square. Hundreds of people inside and outside. We just want to let you know that Occupation Melbourne has not been silenced. Alright? They're still hanging in there. They might move them from that spot, but they're not going anywhere. So right now, there is a rally in Melbourne, and I just want to let out this message of solidarity from the peeps in Sydney to the people in Melbourne. Occupy Sydney supports unconditionally Occupy Melbourne's right to demonstrate for a better future. We call on the police to respect the rights of the 99% before pandering to corporate interests. The global occupation movement will not end until a just and compassionate world without corruption is realised. So here's a shout out to you, Melbourne. Solidarity with Melbourne! Strength with Melbourne! We got your back, beautiful people. Don't let up. It's all good. Now we've got another announcement here. Is that right? Okay. I'll give you over to Tim. Cheers.
This is the official Occupy Sydney statement about who we are, why we're here, and what we want to achieve. We are the workers. We are the indebted. We are the immigrants and the indigenous. We are the homeless. We are the students. We are the unemployed. We are the underrepresented people of the world. We are the 99%. We are Occupy Sydney. The resistance around the world against corporate governments and the devastating effects of the global financial crisis has exposed the realities of the world in which we live. We live in a world where we produce a surplus of food, and yet millions of children starve. We live in a world where the 1% that created the financial crisis are bailed out and rewarded, while the 99% pay the price through the wages, their houses, and their pensions. We live in a country that has never been so unequal, and our environment has never been so devastated. The events of Tunisia and Egypt, the events beginning in Greece, in Spain, and in the United States show us that united in action, the 99% can change the world and determine the type of society we want to live in. We are part of a movement that aims to connect the important struggles now happening both here in Australia and around the world, and is creating a new path towards a society based on the needs and the democratic participation of all. We extend our hand and invite you to join us, because we are the 99%. We are Occupy Sydney! That's officially from the General Assembly, so that speaks on behalf of all Occupy Sydney members and all of the 99% represented here. Everything we pass by consensus represents us. Everything we speak on our own is from ourselves. I pass you on to Susan.
Thanks, Tim. What we wanted to do was to put forward that statement for adoption by consensus by you all who've come to join us today, and those of you who've been part of Occupy Sydney for the last 8 days. The way that we make decisions in Occupy Sydney is that we call for a consensus on a motion, and to indicate your support, jazz hands or twinkle fingers. If you have an issue, maybe you don't agree 100% or just a couple of things, but you don't really want to stand in the way, you do a stand aside by putting your hand up. And if you're really against it and you don't want it to go through, you do this, and that's called a block. So this has been recommended, it's been passed by the General Assembly, but we feel the General Assembly felt last night that it would be important that this crowd today also adopt the statement. So I'd like to call for a consensus, first of all, on adopting the Occupy Sydney statement. So if you agree with what Tim read out, could you raise your hands? Anyone like to stand aside? Hands in the air.
We'll hunt you down.
Anyone who'd like to block that being adopted? Oh. Is that a serious block? Oh, that was a photo. That was a photo being taken. Okay, so I think we have a consensus. So congratulations, everyone. Woo. And now,
This is what democracy looks like.
this is what democracy looks like. We'd like to welcome up to the stage now a speaker, Associate Professor Steve Keen. Steve is a Professor of Economics at the University of Western Sydney, and he's also the author of a book called Debunking Economics. And Steve's actually brought a few copies of his book along today to donate to the People's Library of Occupy Sydney. So please make Steve Keen very welcome.
Thank you. 13 years ago, I wrote to the Reserve Bank over here offering to run a seminar on models of debt deflation, how a debt crisis could hit the capitalist economy. And the offer was declined. I find it rather amusing, in a Schadenfreudish sort of way, that today we're in one. And the first seminar I'm giving about it near the Reserve Bank is actually outside to the public. And it's very fitting because the public has more awareness about how the economy functions and malfunctions than the so-called professional economists do. I'm in discussions now. I might finally get inside the Reserve Bank for that seminar in a couple of months' time. But the problem that we're facing now, the reason you're on the streets here, would not exist if the view of the economy that the economists and the Reserve Bank and government officials around the world and the people who dominate academic economics as well were right. Because according to them, the system's always stable. But there's something fundamentally wrong with their vision of how the economy operates, and there's a profound irony as a result of that. Economists are not experts on the economy. I'd even include myself in that. They're experts on a model of the economy. Now, if the model is right, then okay, but the model they've got obviously is wrong. There wouldn't be 1,000 cities around the world that are demonstrating against the failure of the system if it hadn't failed. And I might add on that note, is Melbourne going to be the only city on the planet that doesn't allow a public protest? Do we want to have that way of being different in this country? Okay. Let's get Melbourne back on the streets again. And back to the economists with their heads in the clouds. Why do they get the world so wrong? Well, they have a set of core beliefs, their little religion, and I really think economics is closer to a bunch of competing religions than it is to a science, is that the economy is always stable and it's either in or near equilibrium. And that money and debt, believe it or not, their models tell them that money and debt are unimportant, which is why they ignored the bubble in debt that grew by a factor of 5 or 6 in this country over the last 30 or 40 years, and by a factor of 6 in America until the crisis began. And they imagine that all of you are what they call rational agents, and it sounds good to be called rational, doesn't it? It's a good word. Only what they mean by rational is capable of accurate prophecy. Anybody rational according to that definition? Obviously they're not, because they didn't see this thing coming. So they've got a nonsense view of how humans work and how the world works, and their ideas are full of theoretical and empirical holes, which is why I wrote Debunking Economics. There's the classic statement about people being in denial, which actually stands for don't even know I am lying. Well, their version of don't even know I'm lying is don't even know I am wrong. And they're still not admitting it today. So protests like you're doing are an essential part of shaking that complacency. Now, at the same time, it's important not to repeat the mistake they made. And that mistake is having a mythical view of how capitalism functions. Because just as you can't manage an economy if you have a mythical view of how it operates, nor can you change it successfully. It'll fall apart. Whatever you might construct. Now that's, in that vision, when you want to understand capitalism, the starting points I have is to say, first of all, money and debt are essential. In the sense that you can't understand capitalism without it, and the reason they didn't see this coming is they leave both debt and money out of their mathematical models. It's no damn wonder they didn't see it coming. They were smashed sideways by what their model tells them to ignore. Secondly, capitalism is fundamentally unstable. That, however, is not totally a bad thing. Part of that instability is why we're walking around with iPods and mobile phones and so on. It's the most innovative, the system which given the most capacity for the human capability to innovate. That's undeniable on that front. The trouble is, it also gives rise to the potential for cancerous innovations. Innovations which generate not new technology and new ways of doing things and new thinking, which has affected this movement. This wouldn't exist without that technology, but also which invents new ways of generating schemes that make large amounts of money by gambling on asset prices with borrowed money. And that Ponzi scheme is what's given us the financial crisis. So the cancerous side has taken over under the cover of people who believe they're letting rip the creative instability of capitalism. They've gone far too far in that way, and that's what caused this crisis. Capitalism breaks down when Ponzi merchants take over, and fundamentally they've been running the economy since 1987. Now I'm going to turn academic on you for a short while. And that is to say that the starting point of understanding the monetary system is to get rid of the myth that you need to have deposits first of all before you can create loans, which is the stuff they teach economic students. The reality is loans create deposits. You walk up to a bank and say, I've got a great idea. The bank says, it's fantastic, we love it, here's $1 million. By the way, you owe us $1 million. That's how money is created. It's that simple. It's double entry bookkeeping. What that means as well is the volume of loans determines the profits that banks make. So they have an inherent desire to create as much debt as they possibly can. Now, that's difficult to some extent. Debt is necessary to finance a bit of personal consumption, new innovative technology, working capital for firms, buying houses when you don't want to rent. That's fair enough. But otherwise, debt's a bad thing. Debt's like having teeth pulled. If you went along to the dentist and said, I have a sore tooth, that's the only one you'd let him pull out. But what if the dentist persuaded you look sexier with less teeth? Well, that's fundamentally what the banks have done to us. They've convinced us to say debt's actually good, because even though it's bad, if you have more of it and prices go up, asset prices, of course, not commodities or wages, if they go up, you'll make more money. So it's actually good to be in debt. And you can see that very simply in the economic data for Australia. Back in 1990, the level of personal debt compared to GDP was about 10%. 2010, it's about 10%. Mortgage debt, which is where you think you see rising prices, back in 1990 was about 20%. It's now about 90. It's gone up by a factor of 4.5 because banks have persuaded us that gambling on house prices is a sensible thing. No, it's not. It's what's caused a large part of the homelessness and the social discord in our society. To continue being academic, if you want to understand what's going on, the best guide to that is the hypothesis called the financial instability hypothesis developed by Hyman Minsky. And I explain that to some extent in my book. The fundamental argument he makes about capitalism is that stability in a capitalist economy is destabilizing. Because we're subject to an uncertain future, when you have a period of tranquil growth, that leads investors, capitalists, speculators to have rising expectations. With those rising expectations, they gamble, and away you go into another bubble. The economy is inherently cyclical, and the reason you have a crisis is largely they'll borrow during a boom, and the borrowing causes the boom. They've got to repay during a slump. And as a result, the debt ratchets up over time, and you finally get a crisis like we have now, when the debt overwhelms the economy. Now, to give an idea of how large that debt is, at the American private debt, and it's private debt that matters. The public debt is not as important by any stretch of imagination. Politicians obsessing about that are chasing the wrong fox. Private debt in America peaked at 300% of GDP in 2009. The peak during the Great Depression was 235%, where we've got a higher debt crisis than they had in the Great Depression. Australia, it's worse. Our debt level peaked at about 160% in 2008. During the Great Depression, it was 75%. We're more than twice as indebted now as we were during the Great Depression. So the crisis we're now going through globally is people reducing their debt levels, and to reduce the debt, you've got to have demand being less than supply, so you can devote part of your income to paying debt down. That's what's causing the permanent crisis, the permanent slump. We're just beginning to feel it in Australia. It's certainly entrenched in the rest of the world. America, in no two ways about it, it's in a depression. They're just taking a while to wake up to it. We face either 20 years more of that through deleveraging, given how long it took after the Great Depression, or what we need is a partial debt jubilee. Dishonourable debt should not be honoured. Now, we need to end delusions as well, and to my way of thinking, often a lot of what's being done here is characterised as left-wing. But I've seen some conservative people here as well talking about their attitudes. It's neither left or right, but realism we need. Now, my contribution to that, and also philosophy and passion about how we want humanity to be, is neither left nor right. Now, my contributions to that are the book, which I've donated 3 copies here, my blog, debtdeflation.com/blogs, and a YouTube channel where I put my lectures out that hopefully give you a better picture of how capitalism functions and what you'll get from reading a neoclassical textbook. But fundamentally, economics won't reform, economists won't reform economics, and financiers won't reform the financial system. It's a public revolt that's needed, and you're the beginning of it, and I applaud you for it.
Thanks very much, Steve. If you want to check out more of what Steve has to say about economics, Steve runs a blog site, which is debtdeflation.com/blog. So check that out, and also check out one of Steve's books at the library. We just wanted to give you a quick update from Melbourne. There are hundreds of protesters on the street, and unfortunately also hundreds of police on the street in Melbourne at the moment. But one fantastic piece of news, and we'll keep you updated on what's going on in Occupy Melbourne, but one fantastic piece of news from the global Occupy movement is that the movement has now grown to the stage where there are 1,600 occupations happening around the world. Well, a lot of people in Australia who may, follow the mainstream media would be well aware of the big fight that's been going on inside Qantas and the war that the Qantas Corporation is engaged in against its workforce. And we're very happy to have here today Peter Somerville, who's with us from the Australian Licensed Aircraft Engineers Union. And Peter's going to come and talk to us about the struggle that's going on there. At last night's General Assembly, we actually passed a motion of solidarity with the Qantas workers, and it's no coincidence that just when they're trying to outsource and won't restore job security provisions, that CEOs like Alan Joyce are receiving exponential increases in their take-home pay. Really does demonstrate the issue of the 1% versus the 99. So I'd like to welcome Peter, one of the 99% from Qantas engineers. Thanks.
You sure? No, I'm fine. I'm okay. Well, look, thanks very much for the invitation, first of all, and we're only too happy to be here and let you know what's happening from our point of view, but also to be part of Occupy Sydney and lend our support to what you're doing. We've been in the middle of an industrial dispute for the last year. It's a year that it's been going on, that we've been trying to negotiate our way through this, but Qantas is interested in conflict, not resolution. That's our problem. What have you heard about this dispute? You've heard about death threats, and you've heard about companies coming out, other companies coming out recently and saying they've got a problem. The death threat to Alan Joyce, so-called, happened 5 months ago. It was signed by the person who sent it. The police investigated and cautioned them. That's the type of thing we've been up against to get our story through. But it's in circumstances where, as Susan said, Alan Joyce has received a 71% salary increase, where our members are asking for 3%. And Qantas says no. It's in circumstances where Qantas cuts 1,000 Australian jobs, and the board itself awards itself a 50% increase in salary. It's about Qantas offshoring those jobs and taking that money out of the pockets of Australian workers and their families and the people who depend on them. In these circumstances, we know we have to fight. We know it's going to be a hard fight, but we also know it's a fight that we have to win. These are good Australian jobs. This is a company which is focused on short-term bonuses to its managers and not the welfare of its workforce. It has been at work. It has been at work. It has been at war with its staff for the last 10 years, and it continues to be. And quite frankly, it's difficult to see an end to this dispute anytime soon, but the fact is that the workers are determined. We're determined to achieve a fair outcome, and part of that is getting access to people like you, to the media and others, to put our case across. So thanks very much for the invitation today, and thanks for spending a bit of time to listen to what I've had to say.
Somewhere in the campsite is an actual copy of the statement that was adopted last night in support of the Qantas workers. If anyone knows where it is, if they could maybe retrieve it and bring it down the front so that people can have a read of it while the speakers are up. Thanks heaps, Peter, for coming to speak today. Our Actually, I'm going to hand over to Ruby now. Sorry. Go, Ruby.
That's because, that's because Ruby likes to introduce the music. All the fun stuff like music and wine and women. That's what we love. All right, let me just introduce you these two ragamuffin kids. I don't know where you kids are from exactly.